Yolita, you know, so many gardens just don't have the space to be able to house the large plants that are in many of our landscapes, and they tend to forget that we have such an array of small plants to choose from. And I'm so pleased to see that you've brought in quite a sample of plants that will fit into small gardening. But I want to start with the big elephant in the room here, our hydrangea. You know, tell me about how you make plant choices and what some of your favorites are.
Well, one thing in particular that I think plant breeders have recognized is that people in more suburban areas love to garden too, and they might have very small lots, small spaces. So they've done a lot with improving the plant breeds so that they're more compact. And so this particular hydrangea here is a Bobo hydrangea, and it's a compact shrub that blooms on new wood, so that you can prune it back to keep it smaller, but it really only grows maximum about 3 feet tall by about 3 feet wide. And as you can see, the flowers on them are just huge and gorgeous.
Just huge.
And the pollinators love them.
So because it grows on new wood, we could cut it back every
you can cut it
every spring.
Every spring, yes, you sure can.
And then kind of control the height.
Kind of control the height if you need to.
Mm-hmm. Are there other plants that we don't have to prune so much?
Yes, this Distilium here, Cinnamon Girl, actually is a very dwarf compact evergreen that can replace, some of your larger boxwoods or hollies that people like to use for foundation plants.
Right.
And its leaf texture is great. The color is great. It gets the cinnamon color on the tips of the leaves, and it doesn't need pruning, shearing, and it's an evergreen.
Yeah, we grow that in our Japanese garden at Maymont. So
they're wonderful plants.
They are. But what about flowering shrubs?
Yes, now if you would like to have a flowering shrub that's compact, and this early spring bloomer, this 9-bark here, this one's called Tiny Wine, and it has smaller leaves than some of the other 9-barks. In the springtime, they get wonderful white flowers on them, and of course the dark foliage on them. If you have a small space, if you have a darker foliage, it can kind of create a little density to the garden to make it look like it's actually more space than it actually is. So that's a wonderful small flowering shrub for the springtime. Now, moving into summer, we have over here this crepe myrtle. And this is a Pocomoke, and this is a very compact crepe myrtle that's just covered in flowers when it's in bloom in the summertime, late summer going into fall.
Interesting. But what about some of the grasses? Because we've got beautiful bold flowers and delicate flowers, but how can we soften this?
Yes, well, of course, when you have a small garden and you want to fill it with as many plants as you can, sometimes it's not about the flowers, but it can also be about the texture and the color of the foliage. Right. And so a nice carex grass here, this one is variegated, and it's called Evergold. And of course, it can take several types of growing conditions.
Yes, it can.
It can take some drying out, and it also can take some more moister soils. So this is a nice grass to add a little different texture to your small space garden.
And it's easy to divide. I grow that one at Maymont too.
Yes, very easy to divide, which makes it affordable when you can divide your plants.
It certainly does. Speaking of somebody who likes to run a little though, that Coreopsis.
Yes. Now the wonderful
tick seed, excuse me.
The wonderful thing about these is that they flower for a long period of time. So you can shear them back mid-season and to keep them smaller. And then they'll send out another flush of flowers for you. So a couple of shearings during the season will help keep this compact and keep it flowering.
Yes. Lovely, lovely. And then a tried and true, that sedum in front of you.
Yes.
I'm sorry, that's deer food in my yard, but I'm hoping to many it's not.
Well, the good thing about this being a nice compact and dwarf form of sedum, you can put these in containers. Keep them up close to the house in a nice container, maybe close by the door. They can take sun and they can take shade, and they can take some drying out because they're a succulent. And of course, this one, Autumn Fire, has a little lighter pink flower than Autumn Joy.
And I think people fail to remember they can take a container, plant it and set it in a spot where it can thrive, but then on a special occasion when it's at its peak, move it
Yes.
to where they can enjoy it more.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And protect it from deer, possibly.
Possibly. But moving on to this purple little guy in the front.
Yeah, this is a penstemon and late flowering perennial that can, late summer flowering. Pollinators absolutely love it, but
Yes.
it's nice and compact, kind of low growing, doesn't get too tall, and full of color late in the season.
I could see where you'd want 3 or 5 of those plants to
Yes.
make a show.
Yes, and it spreads, but it doesn't get too tall.
Right.
So that's why I like this particular variety.
I do like penstemons. They're
Yes.
great plants. But another favorite of mine is our native cardinal flower.
Yes, and of course they're a later flowering perennial. The darker foliage adds some texture to a small garden. Again, that darker foliage makes our garden look a little more dense.
Right.
And I mean, the hummingbirds, late season hummingbirds, just cannot resist this flower. So it's a great addition to a garden. And this one is more upright than it is spreading. It only gets about 12 inches wide, but it can get 20 inches tall, 20 to 24 inches tall. So it's nice, columnar
and narrow.
tall, nice
So it
and
can
narrow.
fit between things.
Fit between things, and the hummingbirds can find it.
But the nice thing about the cardinal flower too is it can take moisture.
Yes, yes. Sometimes it's hard to find flowering plants that like to have their feet wet.
Exactly. And our new little green guy in the front.
Yes. Well, this is an allium. It's done with its flowering, but this particular variety doesn't seed. It's well behaved. It stays nice and compact in its space, but you can divide it, and that's a good thing. Another great pollinator plant for the summer garden that will stay small and fit in a small space.
And I think people need to realize that we need to have our seasonal times of our spring flowers, our summer, and our fall.
Yes, and part of, when you're picking your plant is to try to plan to have plants that are in bloom throughout the season.
But also look good when they're not in
Yes,
bloom.
look good when they're not blooming. This is a nice green foliage.
That's beautiful.
Different texture, almost mimicking a grass.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. So you're moving into one of my new favorites. I planted this in Maymont's butterfly garden recently.
Yes, and it's a native, and our native the straight species that we see out in the fields and the wild can get quite tall and
Yes.
quite large. But this is a compact variety called iron butterfly, and it's just a wonderful native pollinator plant that won't outgrow a small space.
And it's a Veronius.
Yes, it's a Verona.
What I love these is that it's later in the season, and there it is, pow. But earlier in the season is this nice soft foliage.
Yes, right now it's a monarch butterfly magnet.
It is. It is. But it's a plant I love to rub my hands across to have the texture.
Yes, and when you have a breeze and they're blowing in the breeze, it's really nice.
It is. But the grand finale, of course, is the Hinoki cypress, the chamaecyparis.
Yes, and that gold foliage is a great accent plant, and it won't outgrow a space. Now, it can get tall, but it
Right.
won't get huge.
Right, and the important thing is to read the label on this plant.
Yes, definitely read the label. And when you're choosing your plants, know your space, know your amount of sunlight that you're going to get, know your soil, and then try to choose plants that will, over the period of their lifetime, won't outgrow their space.
Right, and understand that the label is really citing it for about 10 years.
Yes.
And that after 10 years, it will keep growing.
Yes.
It just doesn't stop.
Yes, it will.
So you need to understand that maybe in 10 years you need to reassess your landscape.
Reassess, maybe even do a little pruning, a little shaping. Some of
Yes.
these, the majority of these things can take some pruning.
Yes, and it's always fun to just rotate different plants through.
Yes.
Just because you planted it 1 year, 3 years later, you don't have to have it still.
Yeah, create good bones, good structure in your garden.
Thank you, Yulita. This has been very eye-opening to be able to introduce people to plants that will stay small for those who have small spaces to garden in. So I appreciate you coming and sharing.
Thank you for having me.
Certainly.